There's very little political theatre in this country, which is kind of a surprising thing to say, but it is the case. You have the plays of Sean O'Casey, but outside of that, there's very little direct confrontational political theatre in which the ideas of the people that form this country are actually discussed or examined or put on stage in any form whatsoever. The best you get in the Sean O'Casey plays is the shadow of Pádraic Pearse in the pub scene in The Plough and the Stars. Sometimes you get a little bit of political polemic, but not actually the characters of Pearse and Connolly as flesh and blood people. In fact, I can't think of any place where you actually get the character of Pádraic Pearse described as a living, breathing person with views and personalities and a person who can be hurt. So that's the reason we are here in the study of Pádraic Pearse in St Enda's. A good starting place is staring at the balance sheets of St Enda's, trying to make ends meet as he's also thinking about rebellion. The play is about a secret meeting that was held in January 1916 for over a 3-day period between James Connolly, Pádraic Pearse and the leadership of the Irish Republican Brotherhood. And at this meeting, which is a historical incident, it actually occurred, they agreed and settled the date for the rising. Nobody knows actually what happened in the 3 days of the meeting, but goodness, it would have been great to have been a fly on the wall to have listened to the conversation. If it was a conversation, I'm sure it was a very tumultuous affair, considering that the ideas and visions were so different between the main characters, but at the end of it, they had a result. And it was controversial at the time because it was thought that James Connolly had actually been kidnapped to appear in front of the leadership of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, but no, he had gone willingly, apparently. So what this play does, in imaginative terms, it condenses the role of the Irish Republican Brotherhood to a meeting between Connolly and Pádraic Pearse. And in the play you have very much the views of the IRB and of Pearse, and those ideas are pitched against each other in dramatic fashion, at the end of which an agreement is reached and they settle the date. It lasts half an hour, and in the first few minutes there's the use of expressionist theatre, in which the ideas, the political ideas of Pearse and Connolly through their writings are pitched against each other. That gives the viewer or the spectator a bit of context, and then it's straight into the action. And that's where the flesh and blood characters of Pearse and Connolly come to mind. And it's hard-knuckled stuff. This is a frank conversation in which the two execrate each other. They really are hard-hitting and frank in their exchanges. But through that process of argument and disputation, they come to a meeting of minds. The one thing they can agree on, which is that their respective but complementary visions for the future of Ireland or creation of an independent state or republic can actually be married if the two of them work together. The title of the play, Pull Down A Horseman, is an unusual title, and you'd wonder, well, what on earth has that got to do with Pearse and Connolly? In the play itself, Connolly makes a very revealing comment. He says that if you want to get your way, you have to bring the horse to the fence in order to jump the fence, and if the horse refuses, you take it round again and it'll jump the second time or the third time. However, in the course of the play, it turns out that Pearse has turned the tables on Connolly, and it is Connolly that is forced to consider, can he ever jump the fence with his horse? And he finds that in order to do so, he must carriage himself with the others in order to achieve the objective. So in one sense, Connolly the horseman is brought down by the others, but in another sense of the word, by being carriaged with them, their objectives can be achieved. Eugene McCabe is a Monaghan-born writer, and how suitable a person to write a play about Pearse and Connolly, considering Connolly's Monaghan background. He wrote the play in his mid-30s, and he wrote it for the 50th anniversary of the Rising in 1966. The characters of both men comes out very well in the play. You get Connolly's working class background, but you also get Pearse's background. And again, it's the first time that you actually get in dramatic fashion what it was like to be Pearse and his concerns. So Connolly puts it to him that you operate a rarefied environment in St Enda's and looking after elite kids, and you, Pearse, spend a lot of your time promoting the Irish language, the mumblings of Irish from mud cabins. It's very hard-hitting stuff from Connolly. But Pearse replies. He has the integrity of his arguments that he would lay down his life to promote the Gaelic-ness of and the importance of the Irish language, and it's all about us here. We have his writings in Irish all around us, but at the same time, he had an international outlook. You can see it in the room where the bust of Shakespeare is staring in front of him here in the study. You have Milton here on the right. Underneath is the Encyclopedia Britannica, and underneath this again, and it goes to show what an educated man he was, the comprehensive history of England. So it is all about him. And that's what comes out in the play, is the integrity and the depth of Pearse's understanding and belief, something which Connolly, at the end of his very harsh comments, Connolly talks about Pearse's promotion of the Irish language would be like promoting a kind of a bastard version of Esperanto, which is a very hard thing to say. And yet, at the end of the play, there is a respect between Connolly and Pearse which you could hardly imagine as they begin their conversation. In the play, Pearse tells us about the characters that have influenced him. And he puts at number one of his list, Wolfe Tone. And on the teachings of Wolfe Tone, he'd stake his entire career and life and vision. It's the writings of Wolfe Tone. But when you look here in his study, it is interesting that on the table is actually a biography of Robert Emmet and the death mask of Robert Emmet on the mantelpiece. Out in the landing here in St Enda's, extraordinarily, is the chopping block which was reputed to have been used to chop off Robert Emmet's head. But there's no doubt that the influence of the United Irishmen and Wolfe Tone comes across very strongly in the play, and that's what is promoted. And Connolly, in his inimitable way, says, "This is now the 20th century, Mr. Pearse. Have we not moved on from them?" So there you are, in such an exchange, you get the bare-knuckle aspects of their argument. But at the end of the play, when they have come to their reconciliation, Pearse, in his very influential way, says rather quietly, "I think we should celebrate by having a cup of tea. What do you think?" Of course, he was not an alcoholic drinker at all. He goes out to bring the cup of tea. It's only when you realise or be aware of the full story of this entire period that the last thing Pearse did before he left his house was he had a cup of tea with his mother. And the two cups where he had the tea are here in St Enda's. So the play was very well researched by Eugene McCabe. There is hardly a word or a sentence which is not rooted in the actuality of what had occurred. So as a piece of theatre, it is a fine piece of theatre, but it is also an excellent history lesson. A play written 50 years after the events and then being presented 50 years after the play was written, that's a very good question. And it's very relevant in 2016. There's no doubt that the play was written before the days of revisionism, before many of the historical studies actually took a fresh look at the characters of Pearse and Connolly. So it takes The play takes them very much on their own merits, based on their own writings, and without all the revisionism that has taken place since 1966. There is no doubt presenting this play in 2016, some 50 years later, creates all sorts of new questions. Do we see Pearse and Connolly in the same way that we would have looked on them 50 years ago? Have we moved on to, in the light of very many events since then, and to see them not as iconic heroes of the past, but as flawed human individuals? Or are we looking at them now in the light of all the events that have taken place about bloodshed and about warfare and about sacrifice, and how that can be flawed or muddled or poor enough thinking from today's lights? Or do we accept them for what they were in their own time? I think one of the great strengths of this play is that it is, as far as possible, fairly objective. It takes them on their own terms, in their own period, and takes them back into the minds of those people at that time. And we must make of it as we will in 2016.